There are over 100 distilleries across Scotland, and amazingly, amongst this legendary landscape of liquor, one region captures the imagination more than any: the iconic island of the Inner Hebrides, Islay. Islay is an island off the west coast of Scotland, and while it's a destination for many birdwatchers, cyclists, and more, as a destination for those for whom whiskey is almost a religion, Islay holds holy status, with hundreds of thousands making the pilgrimage annually. Some come every year, others plan their lives around eventually visiting. They go with family, friends, with fellow whiskey lovers. It's a special trip. Before you go, you already know what Islay whiskey is. It's on your shelf at home. And when you get there, you go to the distilleries, you get to ask all the questions you've been waiting to ask and see the places you've been waiting to see. And amongst a million distractions, the only constant is what's in the glass. When you get back home, you bring those stories back with you. Stories you've heard from the distilleries, from Islay's histories of peat monsters and peat bogs. You also have your own stories to tell. A missed flight, or being stranded without a ferry out, or being locked in at a pub that I won't name for the protection of this hallowed tradition, or, a story of owning a square foot of Islay. The shared enjoyment of whiskey are the stories that circle around the amber nectar that's in the glass. Every whiskey released under the Character of Islay Whiskey Company's banner is informed in some way by stories like these. Because we're an independent bottler, we don't have a distillery story to tell that informs the contents of each bottling. Instead, we've created whiskeys and selected casks that let the contents of the glass inspire your stories. The stories that we can each own and truly share. In a way, these are the stories we all tell when we return from our pilgrimages to Islay. These are the stories we want to tell, that you want to tell. They're yours. So how we see it is you don't have to be on Islay to be part of our story. The story begins the moment you throw the cork away. Let me just map out the Character of Islay journey for you before we embark on it together, sort of like a table of contents. The story is made up of chapters: Aerolite Lyndsay, Grey Seal, and Fiona Macleod. But it begins with the prelude, the appetizer, the invitation to Islay. This is Green Isle, our blended Scotch whiskey. I think there are probably 5 ways to get to Islay. You could swim, if you're crazy. You could jet ski or get a private boat. You could take the plane. You could take a ferry. And ferry probably is the method that's most proper in the pilgrimage because it allows your internal clock to acclimatize to Islay time. And it stirs your excitement as you slowly approach the rugged distillery spec shores from the sea. But the other way to get to Islay is Green Isle. Green Isle is our invitation to Islay for people who think they don't like Islay whiskey because they don't like smoky Scotch. For those who may fear the heavy, sometimes medicinal smokiness so commonly associated with Islay whiskeys, Green Isle is instead a representation of what in reality is a much more complex and wide flavor profile offered by the distilleries of Islay. Inspired by Neil Gunn's 1944 Green Isle of the Great Deep, a Scottish parable told fully in Highland dialect, Green Isle is a sweet, smooth, and smoky dram that speaks to the glory days of blending, when Scotch took on the world, before anyone outside Scotland really knew what Islay was. It's thought that at one point more than 95% of all the malt distilled on Islay was sent to the mainland to be used in blends, with Islay whiskies adding depth and complexity and a signature fingerprint to tons of iconic global brands. With the burgeoning single malt market gathering at pace in recent decades, more and more Islay is laid down for bottling as single malt. At times, it seemed like demand was often outstripping supply. As such, numerous great blends have been reformulated to make do with a reduced reliance on Islay malts, or to use none at all. Highland and Speyside distilleries have started making peaty whiskies again to meet this demand from a blending perspective. Green Isle hopes to take us back before this shift. Complex, mouth-filling, but easy-drinking blended Scotch whiskey that celebrates the many characteristics of Islay whiskey and its role in helping define the epic blends of old. Let's turn to the first chapter, a 10-year-old single malt named Aerolite Lyndsay. It's a simple story. The simplest stories are the ones that are most often told again and again. As Islay's whiskey's popularity has grown and competition increased, recent years have seen a proliferation of complex liquid propositions and elaborate backstories from the great distilleries of Islay. But I've often felt that I need an encyclopedia or a Scots Gaelic English dictionary to approach new Islay whiskey releases. So Aerolite looks back to a time when whiskey was simpler, where it did what it said on the tin, and what it said on the tin was enough. Extra old Highland whiskey, 8-year-old Speyside, 10-year-old Islay. What I wanted to create when making Aerolite Lyndsay was to take up that space on the drinker's shelf, that space for an Islay whiskey for when you feel like drinking Islay and don't dare dip into the old and rare bottles you keep. An Islay whiskey that ticks the Islay boxes, that it's approachable and delicious. Everything a whiskey that's made for sharing is meant to be. It has all the characteristics we might expect from an Islay whiskey. It's peaty, it's smoky, it has an unmistakable minerality, and the finish of the whiskey is smooth, easy, and actually quite short to encourage you to pick up and have another sip. Aerolite Lyndsay is the kind of Islay whiskey that you share with friends, whether they love whiskey or are new to it. As Dave Broom wrote about Aerolite Lyndsay, he called it a great Islay dram to share during a drinking session. Glasses, friends, throw the cork away. Love it. What could be more simple than that? Aerolite Lyndsay is bottled at 46%. It's natural color and not chill filtered. Simply 10-year-old Islay whiskey. Grey Seal. The next chapter leaps forward. Our character is much older, now 25 years old. Remember, when you see an age statement like 25 years old, that's the youngest constituent part. That's the youngest whiskey in the glass or in the bottle. An aged Islay whiskey is a very precious and rare thing. Grey Seal is precious, rare, beautiful sounding name. It sort of rolls off the tongue like a phrase like cellar door or the room exudes. Grey Seal. But it has a second layer of meaning. Sightings of grey seals that live in the waters that surround Islay. It's a pastime and a sign of good luck, actually, to spot a seal on Islay. Grey Seal is from a mystery distillery, a distillery we can't discuss, but that is something that always starts and stirs conversation for the connoisseurs. You know, someone says, well, the mid-90s Bowmore was very, oh yes, well in 1995 Lefroy changed it. Oh, well, Ardbeg stills were, everyone's got their fact, the connoisseurs, but for the casual whiskey lover, they're on the beach trying to spot a Grey Seal with something delicious in their glass. Simple. Grey Seal is matured exclusively in American oak, and the lengthy maturation has subdued the fire. It's smoky, but it's more smoldering coal than wafts of smoke. Grey Seal is massively fruity, though. Tropical fruits and apple pie, maybe even with a burnt crust. Bottled at 48% alcohol by volume, natural color, non-chill filtered. This whiskey takes inspiration from the stories of Scottish writer of poetry and literary biography William Sharp, specifically the stories he penned secretly in his lifetime under a pseudonym. Sharp took an unusual step of using a female pseudonym, and he was dedicated to it. He kept the illusion up for years. He used to dictate letters by Fiona to his sister, who would write them up in her feminine handwriting. It's that sort of dedication to one's craft that I find so admirable in an artist and a writer, but in anyone. It's part of the romance we treasure in Scotch whiskey. Men and women doing honest work, making an honest product that's celebrated for that honesty the world over. But in a way, like Sharp's letters, it's all an illusion, albeit a well-intentioned one that I believe keeps the true integrity of the creation, in this case whiskey, intact. No matter the marketing campaign or the auction price or the multisyllabic Gaelic name it has, it works to protect the muse. It maintains some of the mystery. And in the mystery is where the magic lies. Fiona Macleod is also from an undisclosed distillery, whiskey of great age, at least 33 years old, some older. You do the maths there. This is whiskey coming from the mid-1980s. And the mid-80s was a very hard time for Scotch distilleries. It was a time when many distilleries have gaps in their stock model because some were closed completely or some were mothballed, just stopped production for a short while. So it's whiskey from an era of thin whiskey inventory, and that's part of what makes this whiskey so precious. It's bottled at 46.3% alcohol, it's natural colored, and it's not chill filtered.